Okay, let's go back to Olowe of Isa and look at these doors that commemorate the reception of Major W.R. Reeve Tucker, the first British traveling commissioner for the province, and his entourage. And here we see a really complex set of imagery here, kind of divided up into these separate panels. This is incredibly high relief. Some of the figures you can see here almost become three-dimensional. They almost really are carved completely in the round. And instead of just static frontal poses, we see Olowe turning the heads of figures in opposition to bodies. There's a lot of engagement and activity here. So this British traveling commissioner comes to visit the Aranjali, the king of Isa, at the end of the 19th century. The left side of the door depicts the British major and his entourage. We are looking here at the right side of the door that depicts the Yoruba king and his entourage. And this is the king. This is the Aranjali himself. He's on a horse, and we see that big conical crown surmounted by a bird. It's over here in the second register of that door. And then in other panels, we see royal wives and children, guards, priests, depicted in the various panels. The very bottom panel here seems to have a decapitated female figure that is indicative of a human sacrifice, which it was an act that only occurred in the rarest of occasions, and really was a ritual that was enacted in the most grave situations where the survival of the community was at stake. Okay, let's move over to Benin. This is another cultural group in Nigeria. Here in kind of the bottom of West Africa, we're looking at the area of Benin in Nigeria. It was one of the major kingdoms of West Africa, and what happens is that Benin comes to control the trade between inland peoples and then the Europeans, the merchants, the traders who came up to the coast. And so the Kingdom of Benin was well known to Europeans starting in the 16th and 17th centuries, and they became very wealthy partly due to trading in slaves. The Benin society was highly structured with a king, or an Oba, who was the supreme ruler and believed to be both the spiritual, secular, and ritual head of the kingdom, really held in the highest veneration. And it's the Oba who retained control over the major export resources, which include human slaves, ivory, gum, and palm kernels. And art is an important instrument of ideology here for the Oba. He controlled artistic production. He had a whole kind of production line in palace workshops for art. And I'm going to bring, we're going to look at some of those examples here, these fantastic plaques from the Oba's royal workshops. Oh my God, the train is going by, but I'm just going to power through, okay? I apologize for the train whistle. Maybe you can't even hear it. But before we actually look at the Benin plaques and talk about their history, a really important event that we need to talk about is the Benin Punitive Expedition of 1897. So what happens is that the British send an armed expedition to kind of see about controlling extending their control of trade. The people of Benin weren't really interested in that. And there's a scuffle where a few of the British envoys are killed. So, in 1897, what did the British do? They send an armed expedition. They capture the Oba. They destroy his palace. They take away most of the sculpture and regalia, including works in wood, ivory, and metal, including the plaques that we'll see. And these plaques, I want to note here one important feature here of the form. These are cast bronze plaques, and metal casting is a very sophisticated process that really, that technology is lost in Europe between classical antiquity and the Renaissance. But metal casting actually in Africa predates that in Europe. And so we see a really complex, sophisticated technology displayed in these works as well. Okay, so what happens to, what happens to all of these things? And we see a picture here of these rather smug looking British soldiers with piles of treasures and artworks. They bring them back to London. And major museums all over Europe and North America purchase these works to display in their collections, and most of them are still there today. And this has been a major point of debate in recent years, that these works and other works that were stolen from the cultures that made them, where the cultures where they are significant to those people, and now they're displayed in museums who are not the rightful owners. And so what happens in 2007 is there's a group formed called the Benin Dialogue Group. They are, it includes representatives from Nigeria and other museums, and they hope to establish the repatriation of many of these works, including the Benin bronzes that are mainly in the British Museum, and give them back. In fact, Macron, the Prime Minister of France, he has urged French museums to return African works of art. None of that has actually happened. Think about that New York Times article that I shared with you. This is an ongoing debate. It does not seem to have any resolution in sight. As you can imagine, a lot of these museums are very resistant to acknowledging their benefit from institutions of colonialism, racism, and imperialism. All right, so this series of plaques, and we're just looking at two, but there are hundreds. They adorned the halls of the king's palace, and they were designed to proclaim and glorify the prestige of the king and his achievements. So they give us a really fascinating insight to royal life in Benin, but it's very one-sided. Of course, we're not seeing how ordinary people lived in villages. It doesn't show us how townspeople lived, and there are no women or children shown in the plaques. So it's not even really a very representative view of the court. We're looking at the Oba with attendants on the left, with a detail in the center, and then the Oba with Europeans on the right. And I love the work here on the right. So let's start there, because you can see here in both cases, the Oba, this is a great example of hierarchical scale. The Oba is the largest figure. He's dressed here on the right in a loincloth with a kind of braided border, and then this close-fitting upper garment that's covered with beads. And then on either side of him, we see two attendants. And where are the Europeans? They're these little weird-looking guys here in the back. They seem almost so kind of inconsequential in the presence of the power and the might of the Oba himself. I left this slide in. We're not going to the African galleries in the museum, but we have a fantastic collection of African art at CSU. We're very fortunate. And so there's that. We're going to move on to talk about the Nkisi Nkondi. And these are works from the Congo. So we're moving kind of down into central, kind of southern Africa. The Congo people, they are Bantu speakers, and they live around the Congo River that has, along with its vast tributaries, it drains this huge region that contains different climate zones and landscapes. And it's the Congo, much like the Nile to the ancient Egyptians, it is a hugely important geographic feature. We're looking at these kind of small, sculpted freestanding figures, but unlike the blah 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 of the ballet people, those spirit spouses, these are public works. And they are central to the belief of the Congo peoples and their use of medicine and divine protection. And I'm noticing the time, so I think I'm going to stop there, and we're going to get into more of the details of the Nkisi Nkondi in the next video.